You don't hear what he's saying?
Yes, ma'am, I
All
did.
you heard was tase me.
That's not what I said, ma'am.
You're tase me and you're not going to fucking tase me. That's all you heard, right?
Yes, there's some other muffled words in there. Not really sure what it is. I'm
You
sure
were
the
right
jury
there,
can
though,
decide.
correct?
Yes,
You
ma'am.
were right there when this was happening.
Yes, ma'am.
And this video just played, and you can't hear what's in between. Can you play it again, please? He's not saying you're not going to take me when I didn't do nothing to you?
That's not what I heard.
And you were right there.
But nevertheless, I did feel it was
That
appropriate to
doesn't sound like
tase
that to you?
him at this point in time.
Sir, that doesn't sound like what he said to you.
I think that's for the jury to decide. I'm not sure.
No, I'm asking you, you're listening to it.
I understand, and that's my answer.
So you can't understand it on the video, and you didn't hear him saying anything like that when you were with him on that day?
Ma'am, I can't tell what the video is saying at that point, and I don't remember exactly what he was saying to me.
So all you caught from what he was saying on that day, you didn't catch anything in between while you were right up on him, other than, tase me, you're not going to fucking tase me. That's all you caught.
Ma'am, it's been 15 months. I'm not going to remember every single word he said to me.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about what you observed at the point where you said yourself and the victim were 6 feet apart.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You indicated that he came at you full speed, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
From 6 feet apart, and he ended up at 3 feet.
Yes, ma'am.
But he was coming at you full speed.
Yes, ma'am.
So he didn't make it all the way to you?
No, ma'am.
Coming at full speed?
That's
from
correct.
6 feet apart?
That's correct.
Okay. You indicated that he was fighting with you, but you don't know whether he hit you.
I'm not sure if he hit me or not.
You don't
ma'am.
know. You also didn't see his hands when he was coming towards you, correct?
No, ma'am. At that point, I was pretty focused on the fact that he was charging at me.
So you just focused on the fact that he was charging at you. You called it tunnel vision.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You had tunnel vision and you were just scared at this point.
Yes, ma'am.
So you weren't paying attention to his hands.
No, ma'am. I was paying attention that he was charging
You
at
just
me,
saw his
and
body
he was
come
yelling,
in.
"Shoot me,
You just saw
motherfucker!
his
Shoot
body.
me!"
Excuse me?
I was paying attention to the fact that he was charging at me, and he was yelling, "Shoot me, motherfucker! Shoot me!"
So he was yelling at you to shoot him, and he was charging at you. You weren't paying any attention to what he was doing, other than coming in your direction.
I wasn't paying attention to where his hands were, ma'am.
You weren't paying attention to where his hands were.
That's correct. I wasn't paying attention to where his hands were.
You weren't worried about where his hands were at this point.
Right now, I was worried about a lot of things, but my primary focus was the
I'm
fact that
asking you about his
I know,
hands.
and I'm trying to answer you, ma'am.
You did not.
I was
know where
focused
his
on the
hands were.
fact that he was charging me. I was focused on the fact that he was yelling, "Shoot me, motherfucker, shoot me." I was focused on the fact that he had already overpowered and disarmed me, and I thought he was coming to kill me.
He overpowered and disarmed you. When he spun around and your taser got knocked out and you don't really know how? That's what you're referring to?
I'm referring to the fact that he got my taser away from me. It flew a great distance, and he had already overpowered me in a fight. That's what I'm referring to,
He
ma'am.
got it away from you, but once again, he did not take it away from you with his hands, correct?
I think we've been over that several times,
Answer the
ma'am.
question, sir.
Repeat the question, please.
He did not take it away from you with his hands, correct?
He used his hand or arm or something to get it from me. He didn't hold it in his hands.
He did not take it away from you with
He
his
didn't
hands.
hold it in his hands. Yes, ma'am.
He didn't hold it in his hands, and therefore he did not take it away from you with his hands, correct?
I don't think that's an accurate depiction. I don't know what he used to get it out of my hands.
So now you don't
Nevertheless, the fact is, the taser went flying away from me. We separated, and then he charged at me, and he screamed, "Shoot me, motherfucker, shoot me."
And so you still
My
don't
life
want
was
to
in danger
answer-
here.
You don't want to answer whether he took it away from you with his
I've
hands.
answered
It's
that,
been
man.
answered 20 times.
So you move on.
Okay. You indicated that you had tunnel vision. You don't know what happened to his hands. You weren't concerned about his hands at that point.
That's not what I said.
What did you say?
I said I was focused on him and the fact that he was charging at me. After he had already fought with me, he'd charge at me and say, "Shoot me, motherfucker, shoot me."
Okay. And you keep saying he fought with you.
Yes.
What do you mean? How did
He was
fight
wrestling
you?
with me. He was trying to get away from me, and then he turned towards me, swinging his arms. He knocked the taser away from me. I can't be sure whether he hit me or not because I was focusing on trying to control the situation. I was focusing on trying to end this safely for both of us.
Was he trying to get away from you?
No, not at that point. When he knocked the taser away from me, he was no longer trying to get away.
Okay. But when
This changed when he knocked the
tried
taser away from me. This escalated
You
fast.
indicated that he was no longer trying to get away, correct?
No, then he was trying to attack me.
Okay, so at some point he was trying to get away from you.
Yes, he was.
And once again, you did not decide to use this to
At
call
that
him back
point,
up.
when he was trying to get away from me, before he was attacking me, I felt like I could control the situation if I used my taser.
All right. So we have heard from many witnesses in this case, right?
Yes,
Do you
many
agree?
witnesses.
We heard from Sandra Tynes.
Yes,
We
ma'am.
heard from Gregory Provost.
Yes, ma'am.
We heard from Stephen Price.
Yes, ma'am.
We heard from Paul Akey. We heard from Matthew Curleen. We heard from Albert Clearleen, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All eyewitnesses to this incident.
Yes, ma'am.
And all of them have acknowledged that this young man had his hands up.
Yes, ma'am.
You indicated earlier that you were the closest one to this, right?
Yes, ma'am.
But you didn't see his hands up.
Well, like I said, ma'am, I had tunnel vision. I was focused on his torso. I was focused on this area, and I was focused on the fact that he was charging me and attacking me.
But you didn't look at his hands.
At that point, ma'am, I had tunnel vision. I've said this 100 times.
I want to remind you about something you said during direct examination. You indicated that in your training, the hands, you have been taught that the hands are the deadliest thing.
Yes, ma'am.
But yet when he's coming towards you, you did not look and were not focused on his hands.
This is a physiological reaction that happens when the body gets an adrenaline dump. It's called tunnel vision.
Objection. He's not a scientist. He's not a doctor.
It's called tunnel vision. You experience it in life-threatening situations when you have that kind of adrenaline dump and you focus on very specific things. And that's what I was focused on. This isn't something that I chose to look at his hand, or I chose to look at his foot, or I chose to look at anything. This is what my body focused on because this is what instinct teaches us.
So at this point, because he didn't get down on the ground and he was coming in your direction, that's why you decided to shoot him.
I decided I had to shoot him, and I did everything that I could to not have to shoot him, but I decided I had to shoot him after he had overpowered me, after he had gotten away from me, after he had gotten my taser away from me, after he had turned to attack me, after he started charging at me and yelling, "Shoot me, motherfucker, shoot me." And then he charges at me. After I told him to get on the ground, repeatedly I said, get on the ground. I'm thinking, I don't want to shoot this guy. Why isn't he just getting on the ground? And then he charges at me, and I had no other choice. I had to discharge my weapon. And then I went immediately to try and make this guy okay. I didn't want him to die. I didn't even want to hurt him.
That's not correct, though, that you didn't have other options. Is it?
That's absolutely correct.
But we just talked about all the different other options that you had. did
And
we
I
not?
said, to each one of those, I explained why it was inappropriate to use those. They aren't an option. They wouldn't have worked. And I talked about each individual one of them.
So even though your policy manual says that they're an option, you decided that they were not.
Our
in that
policy
moment.
manual and our training teaches us that the officer on scene has to make the determination of what's appropriate to the situation. There's no way a policy can cover every single situation.
So in your mind, because you determined that it's not appropriate, now it's no longer an option.
It's not an appropriate option.
It's not an option now.
You're correct.
So because you don't have the taser, now OC spray is no longer an appropriate option. It's not an option now.
In this case, it wouldn't have been appropriate either before or after the taser.
The OC spray would not have been appropriate before the taser, even though in your policy document that the defense has introduced into evidence, it's on the same spectrum as the taser?
That's correct.
It's in the same-
I'd like to answer your question now, please.
Sure.
Okay. When I was holding the subject up against the car, when I was holding Mr. Chapman up against the car, if I had attempted to spray him at that point, our heads were less than a foot apart. I would have got myself with as much pepper spray as I got him, and that wouldn't have helped the situation at all. We would have both been pepper sprayed. Pepper spray is not meant to be sprayed when you're less than a foot apart.
What about after?
What about after?
After your taser's gone, he's trying to get away from you?
No, he wasn't
Did you
trying to
all
get away
not
from me
back
at that,
away
ma'am.
from each other?
Ma'am, he wasn't
Did
trying
you
to.
all not back away
Ma'am,
from each
I'm
other?
trying to answer your question.
Withdrawn that question.
Okay.
You all were not backing away from each other?
We separated. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Because all the witnesses who testified indicated that you all backed away from each other as well, correct?
We separated. We were about 6 feet apart.
Separated to 6 feet apart.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And at that time, when you were 6 feet apart, OC spray is not appropriate? When
No,
you
ma'am.
all are backing away from each other?
No, ma'am. Under these circumstances, it wouldn't have been appropriate. I'd already used an intermediate device. It didn't work, and now he's escalated the situation, and he's turning towards me, and he's attacking me, and he's screaming, "Shoot me, motherfucker, shoot me." Pepper spray would not be appropriate in that situation. It's not going to stop this aggressive action.
And this is a walking or a charging or moving or whatever you want to call it towards you, where you don't know what's
I want to call it
going on with his
charging.
hands. You want to call it charging?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I think that's the
Where he's-
appropriate.
Where he's going full speed in a 6-foot distance and he ends up only making 3 feet of ground.
That's correct.
You're taller than Mr. Chapman, right?
I believe now that everything's come out, I'm 2 inches taller.
Okay. So, anywhere in your training, anywhere in this use of force continuum, this policy manual that you go by, does it tell you that you have to throw out any other options once a certain thing happens?
It tells you to use the force appropriate to the situation.
Is that a yes or a no?
Hold on. It's not really a yes or no question, ma'am. It tells you to use the force appropriate to the situation, as I've said. And if this is the appropriate level of force, it doesn't tell you to go and use the level of force down here just to make sure as a check in the box. You use what you need to use based on the situation that's unfolding around you.
So once again, is there anything in here that says that once you have done one thing, other items come out? Once you have tried one technique, another technique must come out. Is there anywhere in here that says anything like that?
No, ma'am. In fact, it's set up so that were the situation to de-escalate to a place where pepper spray would be appropriate, I could have moved down to a pepper spray.
Okay. And so at the point where you all separated away from each other, what's making you afraid at this point is Mr. Chapman yelling at you?
Well, it's the totality of the circumstances, ma'am. It's everything that's going on. It's not simply just because he's yelling at me.
But you clearly back away from each other. You don't know what his hands are doing because you have now gotten into a tunnel vision mode for whatever reason. What has you so afraid? It's because he's yelling at you? It's because your taser is on the ground? You are now at a point where you feel like you've separated away from each other, but now you can't de-escalate and use the OC spray. You have determined that that's not an option, correct?
I've determined that's not an appropriate option in this situation, no.
And you also had determined that at this point, asking for backup was still not an appropriate option.
No, ma'am, that's not what I said. At this point, I didn't have time to get on the radio. This is happening so fast. From the time we separated, talking maybe 1 or 2 seconds before the shots were fired. Because we separated, and my mind's racing, and I go to my instinct, which is this is the next level of force because that level of force didn't work. And I go to my next level of force, and I'm giving him commands. I'm saying, get on the ground, get on the ground. And as I'm saying that, he's saying, shoot me, motherfucker, shoot me. And then he charges at me, and it took a lot longer for me to explain just that than it happened. I mean, it is fast, and there's not time to get on the radio. If I got on the radio, I wouldn't have been able to defend myself.
So, let's talk about your radio again, since we're on that subject. Staging medics. You indicated that you stage medics because that's a part of your training, once again.
Yes, ma'am.
But aren't
It's
you-
what we do on the street. Anytime there's any sort of unknown to a situation, even if it's just for example, a person passed out in the middle of the road in the middle of the night, medics will stage and not come until police make sure the area is safe.
You knew that you were the only person on this scene with a gun, correct?
No, ma'am, I didn't know that. I still
You
didn't know what was in
didn't?
that pocket.
You indicated that there was hardly anybody around, correct? It was you and the victim and Mr. Provo.
Oh, ma'am, I'm going to repeat myself. I still didn't know what was in that pocket, and that's what gave me cause for concern in the beginning.
Oh, but you shot him in the face and in the heart, and then you handcuffed him, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And so you still don't know what's in his pocket.
Right, at that point, I've got him handcuffed and he's unresponsive. I want to give life-saving measures at that point.
But you don't release the medics at that point? You still have the medics staged at that point?
But we're going to release the medics as soon as I get some officers in to make sure the area is safe. And they're not going to come in until they know that the area is safe.
There was nobody who was a threat at the area at that point, was it?
Ma'am, that's our training, and that's what we do every single time, and I wasn't going to deviate from it.
You heard Lieutenant Saucer come in here and say that he didn't perceive a threat, right?
Ma'am, we don't allow medics in until we get some more officers to make sure the scene is safe. That's what we do, and that's the only answer I can give you.
Because you didn't respond to my question. You heard Lieutenant Saucer come in here from the Portsmouth Police Department and testify that he did not perceive a threat, correct?
I heard Lieutenant Saucer's testimony, yes, ma'am.
That he did not perceive a threat.
Okay.
Once again, you testified that you shot Mr. Chapman. You handcuffed him. And at this point, you still don't know whether there's a threat?
Ma'am, we make sure that there's other officers to make sure the scene is safe before we bring in medics.
So you wanted to make sure other officers were on scene before medics came?
Yes, ma'am.
No matter that you have this young man handcuffed and he's bleeding from gunshot wounds to the face and the heart.
Ma'am, when you're in a situation like this, you do as you've been trained to do. Everything goes back to your recurrent training that you always do. And what we always do is we let the medics in when we have more officers and we can make sure the scene is safe. And I did exactly what I've been trained to do, and I did exactly what I've done every time I've run into a dangerous call.
Nobody else was on the scene though? It was you, this gentleman, and Gregory Polo?
I believe that was it, yes, ma'am.
Okay. When you got Mr. Chapman up on the vehicle, you had him in front of you, correct? At the very beginning?
Yeah, at the beginning when I brought him over to the vehicle, yes, I was behind him and his belly was...
Did you feel anything on his person?
At that point, I had my left arm on his wrist and my right arm on his back and on his left arm. I didn't really have the opportunity to go into his pockets.
So
I was trying to remove his hand from his pocket and take control of
Before you decided that
it.
you were going to drive stun tase him, you didn't decide to pat him down?
Ma'am, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I was trying to keep him under control. I was trying to keep him from resisting and escaping. I was trying to maintain, I was trying to maintain control of that pocket, of that hand in that pocket, because I don't know what's in it. And if it comes out with something dangerous, I could have been hurt. I didn't want either of us to get hurt.
The answer is no, correct? That you did not pat him down?
No, ma'am, I didn't pat him down at that point. A pat down is usually conducted once you've maintained...
Non-responsive at this point.
A pat down is usually conducted once you've gained a certain level of control where you can do that safely. Sometimes pat downs can be conducted in handcuffs. Sometimes pat downs can be conducted with a compliant subject. But you certainly wouldn't do it while you're actually wrestling with a resistive subject.
You know a lot about your taser, correct?
I've had a good amount of training, yes, ma'am.
You've had this taser for a while.
I've switched back and forth between different tasers, but I've had this model taser for quite some time.
You've had this taser long enough to know how to work it, to
Yes,
know
ma'am.
that once you arm it, the video is recording, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And to know that if you unarm it, it's going to stop recording, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And now, after hearing the experts testify, you know that the video will cut off because of battery disconnect or because it's unarmed.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so you knew this taser was armed, right?
When I turned it on, I knew it was armed.
You
Yes, ma'am.
armed it.
I'm the one that turned it on.
Okay? You armed it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And so you knew it was around there somewhere.
Yeah, I knew it was somewhere. I didn't know where it went, but I knew it was around somewhere.
So you knew it was recorded.
Yes, ma'am.
And this young man, when you shot him and you handcuffed him, You've emphasized that you told him, "Don't die on me, man," right?
That's correct.
You knew there was video recording somewhere, did you not?
Well, I wasn't really thinking about that. I was trying to give life-saving measures.
You knew there was a video recording, correct?
I wasn't really thinking about it, but I guess I knew it wasn't at the top of my mind. I had a lot of things I was thinking about at that point.
So that's a yes, you knew there was a video recording.
If you want to simplify it down to that, yes, ma'am.
Yes. We have several people who testified as eyewitnesses. Once again, we went through the name list, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Several of those people indicated that you did not do first aid. You did not begin first aid right away. What did you indicated on direct examination that you moved his body, you handcuffed him, and you began performing CPR, correct?
That's correct.
How were you performing CPR with two hands?
Yes, ma'am.
Trying to push his heart?
Yeah, would you like me to demonstrate?
No.
Okay.
That's enough. You were using two hands to keep his heart moving, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And when you were doing that, blood was coming out of his wounds, correct?
Probably.
Okay.
My concern was to try and get, I didn't feel a pulse, and I was trying to get the heart pumping so that he could stay alive.
But as you attempted to pump his heart, blood was coming out of his wounds, correct?
I guess. I'm not really sure. I believe that's probably correct, but I'm not really sure.
that your
That wasn't my
protocol?
focus of attention at the time. My focus of attention was to try and keep a pulse going.
Was that your police protocol, that you began to perform CPR and you're pumping blood out of a wound as you are pumping the heart?
The CPR, the police protocol is basically what's taught in the CPR class, and that's not how they teach the class. They don't teach you that if you're pumping blood out of the person that you don't do CPR. I don't think that's even mentioned in the class. What they teach you is to continue, if you start CPR because he doesn't have a pulse, continue doing CPR until medics relieve you.
Did you attempt in any way to put pressure on those wounds?
I didn't. I was using both hands to give chest compressions.
You were using
And
both
like I
hands.
said, my focus was trying to give chest compressions. I saw blood on him, but I didn't like see it spraying or anything.
It wasn't spraying at you.
No.
You heard the medic, I.C. Torres, testify that someone was holding pressure on the wound and someone else was doing CPR
Yes,
when the
ma'am.
medics arrived, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Once the medics arrived, I think there were probably 3 of them, plus Detective Manning around Mr. Chapman trying to save him.
But when you performed CPR, as you say, you never tried to put pressure on that wound as you pumped
No, ma'am.
his heart.
No, ma'am.
You declined medical attention, correct?
I did, yes, ma'am.
So you were completely fine, physically.
I didn't feel
at the
I
end
needed
of this,
medical attention.
correct?
I didn't feel I needed medical attention.
You didn't feel you needed medical attention. And you didn't have any scars, no wounds, no nothing?
No, ma'am.
Correct? So going back to when you and the victim were 6 feet away from each other, and he began to come towards you, you didn't hear anything else, see anything else around you at all, correct?
You're discussing the time when I described I tunneled out, I began having tunnel vision?
Correct.
That's correct. When I was in tunnel vision, I wasn't
don't know
aware
what
of
was
my
happening.
situation outside of there.
Not only outside of it, but also with Mr. Chapman's hands. You also don't know that, correct?
At that particular point in time, no, I wasn't paying attention to his hands.
So you have no idea where Gregory Provo was, whether he was beside you or not at that point.
That's correct. I don't know. I'd like to think I would have noticed if he was beside me, but I can't accurately say if he was or not.
But you definitely didn't know what was going on with Mr. Chapman's hands, so you definitely could not say whether he was beside you. Right.
That's correct.
In this tunnel,
Would you like me to repeat my answer, ma'am?
no,
Okay.
in this tunnel, you said you had tunnel vision. So in this tunnel, not only did you not know what was going on around you, but you also did not know what was going on coming towards you, correct?
I knew Mr. Chapman was coming towards me, and I knew he was bringing a lot of aggression with me, I think is the easiest way to say it.
Aggression. But in your tunnel, you didn't know whether he had his hands up like all the other witnesses said they were.
That's correct. I didn't see exactly where his hands were. I'm telling you what I was focused on.
Now you're saying you didn't see exactly where his hands were. But before you said you didn't see his hands.
Ma'am, I think
Right.
that's pretty much the same thing.
No.
No? Okay.
Which one is it?
Can you be more specific? What exactly are you asking me?
When you were in your tunnel, during your tunnel vision, you did not see his hands at all, correct?
I didn't see where his hands were.
You
That's
didn't see
accurate.
where they were.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you were the closest one to this, as you put it.
Yes, ma'am.
And all the other witnesses who saw his hands, you don't know about that.
I'm going to
Because you didn't
testify
see
to
it.
what I saw, not what they saw, ma'am.
Okay. You don't know about any of that. All you know is that you just zoned out in tunnel vision.
Zoned out, I don't think I had tunnel vision. I think that's the best way to say it.
You had
There was
tunnel
so much adrenaline
We
pumping.
established
There
you
was-
said television.
Move on.
This is his response. I'm just trying to get clear.
Well, we all clear. We done heard it 2 or 3 times. Move on.
At the end of all of this, you of course now know that Mr. Chapman had no weapon on his person.
Now that months later an investigation's been done, I've been told that he didn't have a weapon on him.
So your only basis for shooting Mr. Chapman in the heart and in the face was that he was aggressively charging at you.
Judge, again, I'm objecting to this. This is asked and answered multiple times.
I'm not asking again.
No, ma'am. That's not my only basis.
That was your final basis?
No, ma'am. When Mr. Chapman became resistive, I used everything that I could use out of the use of force. I used officer presence. I used verbal commands. I was telling him, it's not a big deal. Come on over here, talk to me. I said, I suppose you know why I'm here. Just come on over and talk to me. It's not a big deal. And I was using a conversational tone. I was trying to calm the situation down. And then when he became resistive, I still didn't escalate for a moment. I was trying to calm him down. I was trying to get him to relax. I was using my soft controlling techniques against the car. And then he turned and became aggressive, and he got my taser away from me. He knocked my taser away. He was swinging his arms. He pushed away from me. He started screaming, "Shoot me, motherfucker, shoot me," and he charged at me. And even before he charged at me, while he's screaming, "Shoot me, motherfucker, shoot me," I'm still trying to not shoot him. I'm still trying to use as little as I can to try and calm the situation down. I'm telling him, just get on the ground, get on the ground. And he won't do it, and he charges at me, and I had no choice at this point. That was the only thing I had left that could stop him from coming and attacking me and disarming me again and hurting me.
Okay. And we've gone over it over and over again about what disarming means, and that he swatted it or he did whatever to it, you don't know, to get it out of your hands. We've been over that, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And we've been over the fact that you said that even after something happens, it can then de-escalate and you can move back to a point where you can use OC spray or something else like that, right?
I really wish it had de-escalated,
We've
ma'am.
been over that, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Answer my question, please, thank you. And we've also been over the hard control techniques, and we've been over that. We've been over what that means, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And we've been over the fact that you didn't use those, correct?
We've been over
And
why
so-
they were
So
inappropriate.
we've been over all of these things, and finally we get to a point where you have separated 6 feet apart. And we get to a point where he starts moving towards you and you go into tunnel vision, correct?
When he was charging at me, yes,
And you
ma'am.
don't see his hands, and then you shoot him. That's it.
I think you're skipping a few steps here, ma'am.
Okay, I've skipped something where you've gone into tunnel vision.
We done been through all of that.
I'm just trying to,
We done been through all of that, at least 2 or 3 times.
okay. So that's it, correct?
Unless you have any further questions, yes, I guess.
No, I'm referring to what happened. We've been through everything that happened several times. We've talked about the taser, we've talked about this policy with the use of force continuum, correct?
Yes, are you
And-
asking
and the
that's it
reason
after
I'm
the
asking-
shots were
reason-
fired? I'm not
The
understanding
final
what
thing that
that's it
happens
means.
before you shoot the victim in this case is that he charges you aggressively, according to you yelling, "Shoot me, motherfucker." And you're telling him to get on the ground, and then when he doesn't, you shoot him. And that's the end of it, correct?
No, you're getting it out of order. He's screaming, "Shoot me, motherfucker, shoot me," right before he charges at me. And while he's doing that, I'm telling him, "Get on the ground, get on the ground." I didn't shoot until he's already charging towards me.
Okay, so he's charging towards you, that leads you to shoot
That's
him.
when I fire.
And that leads you to shoot him.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, nothing further.
Okay. The asp, the baton, it's in your car, right?
Yes, sir.
Do you use a baton on a shoplifting suspect?
Not if it's just shoplifting. The situation would have to escalate far more than just shoplifting.
Did you even consider going to get the baton out of your car?
No, sir.
Where was it in the car? Was it readily accessible to you?
No, sir. I would have had to go to the passenger side and probably dig under a lot of paperwork to get to it. I don't use it very frequently.
And at that stage, was it at that point to use the baton?
No.
Or even go get the baton?
No.
How would you have had to get it? Would you have had to release the suspect, continue holding the suspect? What would you have done?
I can't think of a way that I would do it. When I was holding him against the car, I would have had to let him go and walk around the car and hope, I guess, that he stays where I told him to, or then release him and then have to go chase him down or something. I just wouldn't, I don't know how I would be able to accurately do that.
All right, let's talk about the code 1 button, which I think you said was the end of the world button.
Yes, sir.
All right. If you would have pushed that button, how long would it have taken for someone to respond?
It would have taken at least 20 seconds for the dispatchers to identify that I have a genuine emergency, first of all. And then we can see from the video after I called that I had a huge emergency. It still took 3 minutes before officers arrived.
And how long does this whole event occur?
Less than 1 minute, sir.
So would anybody have even gotten there if you had pushed the button?
No, sir.
Did you even consider pushing the button?
No, sir. We were right at shift change, and as far as I could tell, I was probably the only available unit on the street anyway.
Did you even think about that?
No, sir. I didn't think about it.
The probes with respect to the cartridges, if you have to discharge them.
Yes,
Is there
sir.
a particular distance that you have to be?
Within 21 feet. The closer you are, the less spread you get on the probes and the less effective they are. The farther you are, the more spread you get, the more effective they are. However, obviously, being farther away, it's harder to get both of them to hit.
So if you're standing next to each other on the hood of the car, could you have discharged the probes?
I could have, yes, sir.
And what effect would that have been?
It would have been probably more painful than drive stunning, but being that the probes be so close together, based on the other times that I've had to use the taser, I don't think I would have gotten the full muscle lockup.
And if he had locked up and fallen, where would he have fallen?
Well, he would have fallen to the ground.
And what type of ground is it?
It's asphalt.
Is that a good thing?
No, sir.
The hard control techniques that counsel was asking you about, you talked about separating and pushing off from each other, correct?
Yes, sir.
At that point, were you concerned at all about the only weapon that you had left?
Yes, sir.
And that weapon was?
That was my pistol.
And why wouldn't you have used hard control techniques to be involved in a physical one-on-one fight with the person?
Hard control techniques, in this case, he was bigger and stronger than me. Trying to use a hard control technique, I just wasn't physically strong enough to control him in an unarmed fight. That's the reason that we're given all this equipment.
And what concern did you have about your service revolver in a hard control technique?
In hard control techniques, if I can't control him and we're right on top of each other, he could have easily gotten to my service pistol.
Now, we talked about OC spray. Did you ever consider using OC spray?
No, sir, I didn't.
Thought never occurred to you?
No, sir, we're trained to use an intermediate technique, and if it doesn't work, you need to go to something else.
The counsel asked you about a number of witnesses that testified. You remember Medic Torres that testified?
I do.
And do you remember what she said about how you stage at every shooting?
Yes.
And is that what you did?
Yes.
Stage at every shooting?
Everyone. Yes, sir.
And finally, counsel asked you about the statements that are on the video at the end about don't die, don't die. Did you say that because you knew you were videoed?
No, I wasn't even thinking about the video. The adrenaline, I had so much going on. I didn't even think that I didn't even think about the fact that I was being videotaped.
Thank you.
So, once again, hard control techniques, you didn't use it. Your attorney just talked to you about that. You were concerned about your weapon, your service weapon. That's what you just said, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And even though you have MMA training, your department policy doesn't allow that. Is that what you said earlier?
That's accurate.
And so, rather than go to that, you ended up shooting him. Correct?
It's hard to get from A to B there, but I
That's
suppose.
correct. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Now you may step down.
Thanks, sir.
We have no further action. We rest.
You on the button.
We do, Your Honor.
All right. Call the next witness.
Corey Johnson.
I'm sorry.
Corey Johnson.
Judge, may we approach for a moment, please?
Come on. All right, Madam Clerk. Turn the mic. Members of the jury, go to the jury room, please. You may be seated. All right, counsel.
Judge, as we understand it, this next witness is the defendant's ex-wife, and I'm not sure, number one, what her testimony would be. Number two, I'm not sure about what privileges could be in existence as a result of that testimony. And so I think we need some sort of proffer to be able to sort this out before we put it before the jury.
All right, counsel.
Judge, the testimony will relate to a period while the defendant and Corey Johnson were married. However, she's not being compelled to testify, so the spousal testimony and privilege does not apply. The testimony would also be about separate...
Everybody else remain seated except security. Everybody else remain seated except security.
Just the other day, we called 911 immediately. Called 911 immediately.
What's the problem, Dad? What's the problem? Y'all call 911?
We need assistance. Yes, sir. He went to the hospital, just so they
But they called 911.
Now, will we approach?
Not yet. Focus on this person being consistent. And I said everybody remain seated except those who are rendering assistance. Is he conscious now, Deputy Davis? Is he conscious now?
Yes, sir.
Is that Dr. Peace? I'm asking, is that Dr. Peace? Right, somebody need to go and call his family. Grandson? Is here? Put that in the hallway. Yeah. We'll get the clean. Get it.
Fire the courtroom. That's still on the bench.
Hi, counsel. Do you say you want to approach the bench? What?
Yes.
Come on up. You don't need to be perfect.
I'm not gonna do this.
Go ahead.
Proceed, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Your Honor, the proper testimony would be statements made by the defendant during his marriage to Corey Johnson with others present. I anticipate the defense may reference 19.2-271.2, the statute regarding marital communications As the court knows, there's two privileges, one the testimonial privilege, two the confidential communications privilege. The testimonial privilege does not apply in this situation because the Commonwealth is not compelling Ms. Johnson to speak. The confidential communications privilege does not apply because these statements that were going to proffer were made in the presence of several third parties. They were not intended to be secret or confidential communications between husband and wife. And in fact, evidence will show they were not even necessarily directed toward Ms. Johnson.
What are the statements?
Statements are that this defendant fantasized about line of duty shootings.
Hold on for a second.
Yes, sir.
When?
Several during their marriage, Judge.
What dates? I mean, give us the dates.
I believe. I believe it would be 2008 and 2009, Judge, while the defendant was employed by the police department. Yes.
Judge, obviously, we object to that testimony on multiple grounds. First of all, the remoteness of this 6 years ago, prior to the time of the event that's taking place. The court knows that the court in other rulings has looked at time frames to be significant in its decision as to whether to admit or not to admit evidence. This is 6 years before that. Secondly, the substance of the statement is not rebuttal to any fact or circumstance that was introduced by the defense or through the testimony of the defendant at all. It's not relevant to any consideration that the jury may have, and therefore we'd object.
You may.
But these statements will be offered to specifically rebut the defendant's statement that he did not want this to happen and he did not intend to kill Mr. Chapman.
I'm not going to press you law in this case. Number one, it's too remote. Number two, they were married. And number three, because of the date that was made, I'm not going to do that. No, sir. It's not coming in. I'm not going to do anything. This man is convicted and it goes up on appeal. I'm quite confident, counsel, that the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court will reverse it on these grounds. I'm not going to do that. Okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Anything else?
Yeah.
No, sir.
On both sides rest.
Yes, Your Honor.
You have any motion?
I do, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
At the conclusion of the Commonwealth's case, we've made a motion to strike the offenses of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and also use of the firearm in the commission of the felony. The court at that time denied the motion. We knew those motions at this particular point. There's much more significant evidence that's before the court. And again, what I would focus the court's attention upon respectfully, is I'm sure the court has very carefully taken into consideration all the facts and circumstances, are the events that occurred within this one moment in time. And we really are talking about one moment, 1 minute, as reflected by the CADS reports. And in that one particular minute, the court has heard about the series of events and the escalation of events which culminated in the tragic shooting of Mr. Chapman. But immediately prior to the shooting, the only evidence is, even as related by the Commonwealth's witnesses and substantiated and corroborated by the defense witnesses and the defendant himself, immediately prior to the time of the shots being fired, there is some overt act on the part of Mr. Chapman. Whether that comes from the defendant, whether that comes from the Wawa workers, or whether that comes from Mr. Provo, there is an overt act towards the defendant. When the court considers the events that occurred, the fighting that occurred, the disarming of the taser that occurred, and the court considers the speed with which this event occurred, that clearly is in the heat of passion. That's the best they've got. That's clearly within heat of passion. That's clearly a provocation by Mr. Chapman against this defendant, and there was no time whatsoever to cool. There clearly was no time to premeditate, because immediately upon the happening of the overt act, however you want to characterize that, the shots were then fired. The best that the court can, the best that the Commonwealth can present to go forward with is voluntary manslaughter.
Karen would ask the court to overrule that motion. We would argue that the Commonwealth has proven at this point, beyond a reasonable doubt, that this defendant did willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation kill Mr. William Chapman, and also that he used a firearm in the commission of this murder. Your Honor, with respect to the element of premeditation, the court is well aware that the element of premeditation can be formed in an instant. It is not required to be formed in any specific amount of time. It can be as little as the time that happened in this incident. Defense counsel refers to there being an overt act. Your Honor, we have witnesses who testified before the court that there was a potential step and that the victim moved backwards, and we have one witness who didn't do anything but observe the defendant telling the victim to get down on the ground, and then he shoots him. Your Honor, there is nothing anywhere in the law that permits someone to shoot and kill someone with this disproportionate amount of force. An overt act in the direction, moving in the direction of someone with being completely unarmed. Your Honor, when this person has decided to shoot and kill someone instead of responding with equal or some type of proportionate force, the Commonwealth would argue that the element of premeditation has been well established and would ask the court to deny the motion to strike.
Again, sir?
You may respond.
Again, Your Honor, the Commonwealth refers to a sliver of the evidence. The Commonwealth refers to the end of the evidence. The court can't do that with all due respect. You have to take into consideration the totality of the circumstances that occurred in that one moment in time, in the events that led up, sir? I'm sorry, in the events that led up to the ultimate decision to discharge his service weapon. You can't ignore what happened beforehand. You can't ignore the relationship between the parties. You can't ignore the provocation that was present as a result of the fight, and we can't ignore the fact that this is a police officer. It's not somebody that's in a bar, that's involved in a card game, that's involved in some sort of fight that results from the card game. It's as a result of an officer attempting to do his duty in the line of duty, and these events that occurred. Under all those circumstances, I'd submit to the court that the evidence is insufficient.
You know, there are certain instructions that I would give to the jury. One would be with respect to the credibility of the witnesses. And that leads to a question of facts. And probably but for Mr. Proco's testimony, your motion may be granted as to certain issues, but with his testimony, I think it'll be up to the jury to decide whether or not they believe Mr. Proco or whether they believe the other witnesses. So your motion is denied. Okay. Now, did you all clean up those instructions?
You're up.
Yes, Your Honor.
Bring the jury out. Wait a minute. Do you have an exhibit that belongs to it?
I do, Your Honor.
Bring it up. All right. All right, members of the jury, is the chair, Michael? It's about 5 minutes to 1. We'll recess for lunch for you all now, okay? Follow the directions of the deputy. The lunch should be here about 1 o'clock, all right? Enjoy the lunch. All of the instructions I've given you previously, they still apply. Okay? Have a good lunch. We'll start back up at 2:15, okay? Yes, sir. Make a seat. Based on my rule with respect to the motion to strike, there are a number of instructions there that I think that you all, I know you can object to them, but you don't know what I'm going to decide on, okay? You can take 30 minutes, go get you something to eat, or tell you all the need that you need to, hopefully get something quick. I want you all back in at 2 o'clock. It'll give you more than 30 minutes. I want you back at 2 o'clock. And I want you, in matter of fact, bring them back to my conference room so we can get the instructions right. And you did clean up the instructions, I asked you to clean up, right?
Yes, Sean.
Yes, we did, Your Honor.
All right. Okay.
All rise.